Hello, everyone. My name is Diego Perez, and here with me is Vadim Caen.
Hi.
We are both software engineers in the Android Studio team in London, and we are here to talk a little bit about layout editing, and more specifically about the layout editor and how you can use it to be more productive. So this is something that we hear quite often, and it's I prefer to edit my layouts by hand, and there are many perfectly valid reasons. But we want to show you is how the layout editor can actually help you to be more productive, even when you are editing your layouts by hand. So with the help of ConstraintLayout, which is something that we released a few versions ago, and the layout editor, there are some tricks that you can actually use to be more productive and faster while developing your layouts. So one of the reasons that we usually hear is I want to keep my XML clean, right? Because in previous versions, the layout editor used to actually mess up your attributes, move them around and change them, and that's not nice. So now we don't do that anymore. We try to keep your layout as you want it, so we keep all the attributes alphabetically sorted. So hopefully that's a much better way. But that's not the only thing that we do when you are actually changing your layout with the layout editor. When you have attributes that you don't need anymore, so if you convert from one view to another and we see that you have attributes that are not needed anymore, we'll remove them. So you will end up with a cleaner XML. So Vadim is going to walk you through an example of how to use it.
I got it. Yeah. Thanks. So the idea of this talk is to walk you through like a set of real case examples. So we took the music application as an example, and we were going to build some layout and using some tools like the asset wizard to create your icon. We're going to talk about sample data, design time attributes, and many other tools that are either within the layout editor or around. So you might be quite all familiar with the layout editor, but let's just have a quick tour around and just to have the same vocabulary of it. So the main area here is the design surface, which is composed by two views. On the left side, we have the design view, which is the preview. Some of you might call it the preview. And on the right side, we have the blueprint view. And the blueprint view is kind of a nice view if you want to focus on building your constraint with constraint layout, and you don't want to be distracted by any other graphics. So it will just show you the bounds of your component and the constraint. Then on the right side, we have the attribute panel or property panel, which is a way to edit your XML attribute. So by default, we are showing you the most used attribute that might be the most useful for the currently selected view. But if you want to edit more of them, you can still click the View All attribute, and it will display the whole list of available attributes, and you can use the search bar to skim through them. Then on the right side, we have the palette. And the palette is not only showing the components that are available in the framework. We are analyzing your app to find any custom views that you might have defined or any library you are using. So if you click on the project category, you'll be able to see through your custom-defined views and search through them. Then we have the component tree. Component tree shows you the hierarchy of your components. And it's kind of a powerful tool when you think that it's a mirror of your XML. So if you want to reorder, organize your XML, you can do it in the component tree, and it's maybe way faster than actually like copy-pasting your stuff around. It's also a good way to define the painting order of your component. So for example, with constraint layout or with frame layout, you might have some component overlapping each other. So what you want to do is using the component tree to decide which one is painting before. So the component on the top will be drawn first, and the one on the bottom will be drawn later, so that will be overlapping the first one. Finally, we have the issue panel, error panel, that you can trigger either by clicking the E key or the button on the top right. So the issue panel shows you two kinds of error. The lint error that you might see in your XML file, and we're showing you the fix that goes with it. So for example, if you have, let's say, a button with a static defined string, we will show you the quick fix to extract this string into your resource file. And we will also show you any render error. So a lot of you might have the issue of your layout not rendering, and most of the time you might have some good hint about why your layout is not rendering by looking at the error panel. And there is many reasons for that. It could be like you didn't build and you created a new custom view that you referenced in your XML, or you might just are referencing maybe a library that is not imported in your Gradle file. Yeah, so that's it. So the first view we're going to implement are the player control. And to start with, we'll just drag and drop a button from the palette. And we change the background to this icon and remove the text. And this is how our button looks like. And it's not quite what we want, right? We want something more square. So the good thing about constraint layout is that it does not only constrain your component in position, but it will also constrain it in dimension. So by using the widget on the right, the constraint widget we call it, you are able to toggle through the three kind of constraints that you can have. So wrap content, which you are all familiar with. We have fixed size, also probably known, and we have match constraint, so that will stick your component to the constraint. And if one or the two of your dimensions are set to match constraint, you'll be able to use the aspect ratio button, which is hidden in the corner here, and that will allow you to have some nice square button. So a little more about aspect ratio. What you would do, like without using constraint layout, you might probably subclass the image view class to have some square, like square image view or circle image view. But with constraint layout, you can just define the aspect ratio you want. You don't have to subclass anything and apply any ratio you want. So in our case, we have a 1:1 aspect ratio, but nothing prevents you to have a 2:1 or 1:3 ratio. And we can go even further than that by setting both our constraint to match constraint. In that case, we can just play with, for example, margins, and we have a nice component which keeps the aspect ratio. And some nice use cases are animation here, so we can animate the margin, or we can have some nice responsive layout using aspect ratio. All right, so we have our first component, and we still need to implement the rest of it, right? So people not used to constraint layout might think about linear layout here right away. So we have a some linear button. So of course, linear layout is an obvious choice. But whenever you are thinking about linear layout and using a constraint layout, you should think about chains. So chains is a way to align your attribute all together, and you can then center them vertically or on the same height or same bottom. So let's see how we create a chain. So from our previously created button, we still need to create some more. So we'll just copy paste it a few times. And once we have our button ready, what we could do is just select them in the component tree, right-click, and use the contextual menu to find the create chain action. So here we go, we're creating our chain. And in just one click, we created our chain. And if you think about this, what you would write in XML, you would have to write for every single button. Like button 1 is to start of button 2, and button 2 is to the end of button 1, and this for every single component, which is kind of a long thing to do. So here the layout editor comes very handy. So a little more about chain. There is several kind of them. The one we just use is a spread chain, which gonna distribute evenly your component together. Then we have the packed chain, which is gonna pack all your component together. And in both cases, margin are respected. So as you can see, between our thumb and our arrow buttons, we have the margin applied. And then we have spread inside, which is kind of the same as spread, but instead of distributing evenly your component, what we will do is first stick your two external components to the constraint, and then distribute evenly the other component inside, still by respecting the margins. So here we go. One thing I wanted to talk also while we talk about chain is bias. So bias is a way to tell constraint layout toward which constraint you want to align your component. And this might be quite handy if you want to define, like in a relative manner, how your layout or your view are displayed. So bias is applicable either to chains, like here, or to a single component. So you can play with it as you want. And here again, using the attribute panel, you can easily switch between different bias and have a nice live preview of it. So let's go a little further and have our icon added.
OK, so now we have our layout. And it looks like that. It looks great. Everything is in the place that we actually want it to be. But you probably noticed that we don't have the right icons. So that is something that we want to fix. So what you want to do is to probably create new icons. So you maybe have your icons, but maybe you're not aware that we also have a library that you can actually use. So if you go and create a new resource and a vector drawable, so new and then vector asset, this is the dialog that will display, and you probably notice the clip art button. So if you click it, we have a list of very useful icons that maybe you like. They are used in pretty much every application. The advantage is they are not PNGs. They are actually vector drawables. So you can resize them, you can tint them, you can customize them for your application. So in this case, we are going to select the skip next. So I created it. And now you can, in that area, you can customize the icon. So you can change the size, you can change the tint, you can make it look a little bit more what you want. So if I click next, basically the vector asset manager is going to tell me this is what I'm going to create it. Also, if you don't want to use any of the predefined ones, you can actually import an SVG and do pretty much the same process then, customize it. So now we have created our icon. And you can probably not see it, but it's there, it's rendering. So the layout editor also allows you to render the vector drawables, and you can see them. You can see the changes that you make in real time. So if you change the path or if you change the tint of the icon, you'll see it in real time, and you see how it looks and how every change that you do affects your layout. So once you have your icon, probably you want to assign it to one of the buttons. So you click it, you go to the background property, and then you can do this. Very common. You are probably familiar with this from XML. So syntax completion also works in the property, so you can find it. But maybe you are not sure of the name, you don't know how it was created, so you can also go to the resource chooser and navigate. You can search, you can see resources that come from the libraries or things that you actually might already have in your project. So you select the icon that you want, click OK, and there we go. But let's go back a little bit to the attributes panel. So in this case, you can click the two arrows at the top, and that will display every single attribute available for that view. In this case, what we are doing is displaying all the attributes and then searching, and we want to actually change the alpha in our button. So you search for alpha, and you set it to whatever you want. In this case, we are going to make it a little bit more transparent. So that's how you do it. You also probably notice this button next to the alpha button, so this brush. That is the button that you have to use if you want to set a tools attribute, a design time attribute. And we are going to talk more about that. But basically, you have to keep in mind that design time attributes are attributes that will only apply when you are seeing the preview in Android Studio. When you compile, they are removed, so they disappear. They are not in your APK or anything. So now you also probably notice in the component tree that we have a lot of errors. So in order to inspect them, you can click at the bottom at the top, or you can press the E key, and then you will have the issue panel. The issue panel displays things that are not working with your layout, so they will cause errors at runtime. But it will also display linked errors, things that we think that are not right. So it's a very quick way of looking into your layout and seeing what's wrong. In this case, it's complaining about every button not being constrained vertically. The reason for that is when you use ConstraintLayout, you have to apply constraints to the borders, to the top and to the sides, the bottom and the sides of your layout. If you don't, at runtime, your components will jump to the top, and you don't want that. So basically, we display this error to warn you about that. So let's fix that. You just select all the attributes. You don't have to go to the XML and change one by one. You can select all of them, and what we are going to do is we are going to use the menus to create the center vertically. Let me do it again. You click center vertically, and basically what we do is we create all the constraints, right? So you see all the errors but one disappear. There is one error because what we have done is we attach every component to the component next to it. So there is one more thing to do, which is attach it to the parent. But we'll see that a little bit later. So another thing that you want to do with the studio, let's jump a little bit forward on our layout. So this is how it looks right now. So we created a header, and we created some new components. And at this point, it's getting a little bit more complicated. So you might notice that, OK, maybe this part I want to reuse. Maybe I want to use it somewhere else. Maybe I want to include it in a different layout. Or maybe I just want to reorganize things so it's better for me to actually manage. So one useful refactor, so you can go to the component tree, select all the components that you want to extract, and there is a refactor in the context menu that will allow you to extract it into a new layout. So basically, select all the components, right-click, refactor, and extract layout. So You click that, we give it a name, and we are done. So you have the same layout, but now we have an include that is pointing to the new header that we decided to create. So pretty useful. You can navigate to the included layout by double-clicking on the component tree. And so in this case, you double-click the include. And if you want to go back to your layout, you just have to click in the back arrow in the component tree. So you can also navigate and see in context and edit the new layout that you just created. So let's talk a little bit more about the design attributes that I mentioned before.
Clicker. Thanks. So design time attributes, as Diego said, are attributes that are only applied at design time. So the way we can think about it is, like in Java, for example, you have so we have the tools attribute in XML, and in Java it would be annotation. So in our case here, we have this string show all apps, which the value is all, and we don't want to translate it in Italian, and we don't want to have our lint error showing. So what we can just do is add the tool missing translation attribute, and then we get rid of it. So design time attributes are a subset of all those tools attributes that we have, and they're going to change how your layout looks like on the design surface. So here we're going to use design time attributes to provide some context to our view. So for example, we have our player control here that's going to be included, that might be already included in another view. And the way to show this control in context of where they are actually used is to add the show in tools attribute that refer the layout where this layout is used. So now we have a full context of it, and it's quite nicer. And for you who really prefer using XML, there is some other context attribute that you can add. So for example, here we have our onClick attribute that reference to our onClick button listener. But this listener doesn't exist yet, all right? And manually, you would have to go in your activity, create your handler, and then it would finally work. But what you can do here instead is provide the context where this button would be used. And that gives some information to the XML editor on how it's going to be used. So we can provide you with some nice quick fix action here. So now if you press Alt-Enter on the onClick button, we will provide you with a quick action of creating your listener. Right, so fragment is another example of where context is quite useful because fragments have a life cycle, and the life cycle is not run during the rendering of the layout in the layout editor. It's good for you to provide some context about it. So this view will just translate to some gray boxes here, which is kind of boring and does not give you much more information about your layout. So what you want to do instead is provide which layout is going to be populated at runtime to your fragment by adding the tools layout attribute. And that way, we have a nice layout with our two fragments showing, which give much more information to you, but also to your teammate or your future self when you're going to open your layout. You won't have to run it on device or emulator to see what it actually looks like. So it's quite powerful to do that. So design time attribute allows you to disable lints and provide some context, but you can go way further than that with a feature I love, and Diego is going to present it.
So there is another use of design time attributes, which comes pretty handy. It's something that we added in 3.0, which is called sample data. But before we get into that, so the other thing that you can do with design time attributes is to replace any attribute in your layout. So any Android attribute, any app attribute in your layout can be replaced using design time attributes. So let's see an example. This is how you have this layout, and by default, when you drag and drop a new component into your layout, it will look like that, right? So it has a placeholder with that says text view. In your case, it might actually be empty because that data might be coming from a service, or it might be coming from your database or from your backend. So when you are designing the layout, your layout is empty, which is not very helpful when you are trying to see where everything needs to be and how to position your components. So there is this thing that we can do, which is tools, text, and then we can assign a value. We can say some title. So that's already better. So now we see something that looks more like what we want to do. And you can use this to replace any attribute. So you can replace not only text, but like other properties. Another common use case is what you see here on the left. So you drag and drop a recycler view, and it looks like that in the layout editor. again, other than taking space in your layout, it doesn't really add much information. So it doesn't help you to come up with a good design. It doesn't help you to see how your application is going to look. Probably what you want is something more similar to what you have on the right. That is more similar to what you have at runtime. So let's see how we can actually get into that. So when your layout is empty, again, similar to the previous example that I talked about, it can be because, like, obviously, when you have a recycler view, you use an adapter, and the adapter will read the information from somewhere else. So we don't have that information at design time, but you can do more things. So if you have an empty recycler view like this, it's very hard to design, and it's very hard to also localize. So you don't see how it looks with different languages. You don't see how much space things are taking. So that's not great. So let's do something with this. So you probably already know about the list item attribute in the tools namespace. So you can do that. And basically, you can tell the layout editor, this is the layout that I plan to use at runtime. So that already looks better. So it's not just lines of text. You already have like a layout that you actually created. You can do other things, like customizing the number of elements. So you make it look a little bit more like what you will have at, in your application. But there is another thing that you can do, which is sample data that I was talking about. So first, how do you create sample data? Very easy. You go to your application, click New, click Sample Data Directory, and then within that directory, let's create just a simple text file with a list of colors. So we are going to call this material colors, and this is how it's going to look. And now let's use it in our previous layout. So what you can do is you can do, OK, let's replace the tint attribute in my item layout that I was talking about before with add sample / material colors. What this will do is for every item in your recycler view, it will get a different color. So yeah, that is already better. It looks good. So yeah, that's fine. But you can use it, as I said, like design time attributes are very powerful. You can replace anything. And we already talked about text. So let's also replace the text. So in the first top text view, you can replace it with another list of strings. So what I did is I went to my project, created a list of song titles, and then added add sample / song titles. So this is how it looks. And now at the bottom, I'm going to do something similar but slightly different. So you probably noticed that it's not add sample anymore. It's add tools sample. So there is a number of predefined data sources that we provide in Android Studio that you can actually use. So in many cases, you actually don't need to create your own files. So in this case, we are using the full names. So for every item, Android Studio will pick up a new full name. So that's how it will look. We have many different data sources. So you can have a look using syntax completion. So we have first names, we have cities. We have, obviously, lorem ipsum. You can decide how many words you want into your lorem ipsum by passing like this type of array parameter. We also have images. So you can actually put some avatars into your application, which is something that we use quite often. But you can also add images of your own. So let's assume that in your application, you want to add like album covers. So it's very similar to what I did before. Instead of creating a file and adding a line per item, what I did is I created a folder and dropped a lot of images there. It works exactly in the same way. So now I do add sample / covers. And the recycler view will get a different image for every single item. So that's how it looks. So let's use it. So now I go to my item, and then I say, tools, source compat, add sample / covers. And that doesn't look exactly like the item that I had in mind. So we actually forgot to set the size or to fix the size of the item. So this is something that we caught at design time. So you didn't have to start your application. You didn't have to wait for the server to be done. You didn't need to like read data that you didn't have. Yeah, it's much faster than actually using the emulator or running the application. So we fixed it. OK, so that looks better. There is an additional data type that you can use in sample data, which is JSON files. And what this allows you is to put all your data in a more structured way. So in this case, what we have done is, let's forget about the list of items that we had before, and let's put everything within JSON. So we have an array called songs, and then we have different items with title and author. So let's use it. It's very simple. So now what we have is add sample slash songs.json, and slash title will get you a title in every invocation, and author will get you a different author in every invocation. You don't have to use all the data, so maybe you can add additional information for translations or anything that you want, or maybe you can even get it from your API. So if you have a JSON API, it's very easy to get a sample response from your API and then put it into the sample data directory. So you already have a layout that looks better with that. So let's talk a little bit about custom components now.
Yep. Thank you. So most of you, maybe all of you, are using custom component within your application. And there is one really frustrating thing that often happens when you are using custom component. Is this gray box that you see in the layout editor that doesn't provide any information to you. So the reason why we see this gray box is because your custom view cannot be rendered within the layout editor. It might be relying on the activity lifecycle, so maybe creating some stuff in the onCreate method, or it can rely on services. So we'll take a tour around what you should do and shouldn't do when building custom views. So that's kind of what I say. Don't use dynamic data directly or provide default. Don't rely on the activity lifecycle, and don't depend on any services. Instead, what you should do. So we'll talk about it with this custom component for like it's a seeker, quite simple. And first, we're just gonna put a placeholder on our view with a red background, so we kind of know where our seek bar will stand. And we start implementing our custom component. So there is just two fields with the setter and getter. And what we're gonna do, or what might happen with the setter and getter, is that we might be calling them during our onCreate method in our activity lifecycle, right? So doing that, what you would end up with in the layout editor is just a gray slider, which is not what we want, right? What you should do instead of providing those colors in your onCreate is to create some stylable attributes and reference those colors within your XML. So in our case, we have our tracker tint and position tracker tint defined as an attribute. And wow, nice. So yeah, I was saying, then we define our color in our XML, right? So as I was saying, don't rely on the lifecycle and use attributes that you can pass through XML. But you can do even more. You can create some default in your custom view, and for this default to be applied, you need to not forget to compile it, otherwise the layout editor won't know about them. So when I'm talking about default, like in that case, for example, we have playtime that delegate the call to a service. So the service won't be called. It won't be even created at render time. So it will cause a null pointer exception within the layout editor, and we don't want that. So instead, what you could do is use the isAndEditMode method that is provided part of the framework, and that will return true whenever your layout is rendered within the layout editor, and false in all other cases, including the emulator. So we just provide a static string that will be able to be rendered in our layout editor. Right. So of course, don't rely also on access to databases or the internet while you're in your custom view. Or if you do that, provide those branches or default within XML. Right. So now we can go back to our full view with our placeholder, and we've recently added the convert view to the layout editor. So if you right-click to any view, you'll be able to convert it. So by default, we provide a list of elements that might be suitable to convert to. So if you right-click on a container, the list will be populated with some other container. And if you click on an actual view, the list will provide you with some useful view. Or you can use, like here, auto-completion and reference your custom view. So here we go. We have our custom view created and rendered in the layout editor, and much more nicer to see your work directly here. Right, so let's go on to the last chapter.
Yeah, so let's talk very quickly about the last thing that we wanted to present, which is the device configuration toolbar. So the device configuration toolbar is the toolbar that you see at the top, so that one. It allows you to change many different things. So you can change API level, you can change your locale, you can change your theme. You probably already know this. But again, this is about like helping you to be more productive. So let's talk about one case by like switching devices and sizes. So if you open the device selection, you'll see that there is a custom selector. And so if you choose one of the devices, we will automatically switch to that device, and you'll see how your layout looks in the preview for that device. But if you select custom, what we will do is we'll display an arrow in the bottom right corner that you can actually use to resize to any size. So if you actually make it match to one of the predefined devices, we'll snap it to that, and then we'll display how your layout looks into that. But you can use any arbitrary size. And let's see why that is useful. Especially when combined with constraint layout, this is really, really powerful. So let's see an example. So we have this layout, and in like this device, it looks like that, which is fine. We have plenty of real estate, so we can add as many icons as we want. But what we can do is, using constraint layout and the power of constraint layout, we can actually make some of the icons disappear for smaller screens. So what I get to do is, like when I resize, I can see how it actually looks. So I don't have that much space here. So what I do is I remove 2 of the icons. And you can see how it looks in the layout editor without, again, having to have many devices or like having to like resize it in like somewhere else. Another very useful case for the toolbar is theming. So let's see an example with this theme. So we have our regular theme, which has the color button normal set to that. We have the dark theme, which has is basically like the inverted version. So we have white on black. And we have the no action bar theme. And what we have done is, in one of the icons, we have used one of the theme attributes. So the color for that vector drawable will come from the theme. So again, let's go back to the toolbar. So you click there, and now we can switch and see how our layout looks in different themes. This is definitely much easier than actually going to your manifest and switching the theme and having to run it in the emulator. Maybe this activity is embedded like 3 layers deep into your application. So you don't want to navigate to it every single time that you want to see how it looks in a different theme. So the layout editor can help you with that. So that is the way to do it. So yeah, let's summarize.
Yeah. So I guess the main point that we need to remember from this talk is, if you're using constraint layout, it's way better to use the layout editor to increase your productivity, because constraint layout is quite verbose, and you will save a ton amount of time by using the layout editor. And same, if you're using the layout editor, you will have much more feature available if you use constraint layout. And the thing to highlight here is that the same team is building constraint layout and the layout editor. So it's the first time that this happened. We are building a layout with the tools that go with it. So really, constraint layout with layout editor is great. Don't forget to use design time attributes. It's powerful to preview your view without running on device or emulator, and it's faster. Use sample data. So it was announced at I/O last year, and it's great. Being able to not create like static data in your application and replace them in your adapter. It's great to be able to do that directly in the layout editor. When you create custom view, don't rely on external services or activity lifecycle. And yeah, and all of this you'll be able to quickly preview your layouts. And when you come back to it, you don't have to run on device to see what happened. So hopefully, those of you who were like part of some developers, next time we'll see you, you'll be some happier developer that might be using the layout editor hand in hand with XML editor, and you'll be more productive. One last thing, we're going to be at I/O talking about constraint layout, so new stuff. Some of them have been announced at Chicago Roboto, so the slides are already online. They're made by Nicholas and John. And there's going to be some new stuff. So you can see it in live stream or later on YouTube, or if you're here, we'll meet you there. Thank you very much.
If you have any questions, we are going to be around, so just grab us when we get down.
And don't forget feature request bug. Go on issuetracker.google.com, and we'll actually look at them ourselves, and we implement them or fix the bugs.
Thank you.